Right now, as you watch this, American warplanes are completing their 7th consecutive day of precision strikes against Iran. Explosions rocked Bandar Abbas last night. Air defense sirens activated in Tehran before dawn. A 90-minute strike package hit cruise missile launch sites and coastal defense batteries on Greater Tunba Island, the rocky strategic outcropping that Iranian military commanders have called the arch defense of the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. Navy-guided missile destroyers are enforcing a blockade of Iranian ports. Iran fired ballistic missiles at a U.S. airbase in Jordan. Kuwait scrambled its air defenses against Iranian drone swarms. Qatar activated missile alarms. And Brent crude, which the EIA tracked at an average of $105 per barrel in June, surged again overnight after Iran's IRGC declared the Strait of Hormuz, in its own words, now highly unsafe and completely closed. The most important 21 miles of ocean on planet Earth, closed. This is not a scenario planners ran in war games. This is not a theoretical energy security concern debated in think tanks. This is the real thing. The event that every energy analyst, every naval strategist, every global shipping executive has spent the last 20 years dreading. Iran has mined the Strait of Hormuz, blockaded commercial transit, attacked vessels flying the flags of the United States and its allies, hit oil tankers with missiles and mines, and declared the world's most critical maritime choke point a war zone. And the United States military said, "Hold my JDAM." From the moment Iran sealed this strait on February 28, 2026, the day U.S. and Israeli forces launched Operation Epic Fury, killing Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and beginning the 2026 Iran war, CENTCOM has been conducting one of the most concentrated, sustained campaigns of precision firepower against a single adversary's maritime infrastructure in modern military history. In March alone, U.S. forces struck more than 90 Iranian military targets on Karg Island in a single night, deliberately preserving the oil infrastructure while obliterating the military assets surrounding it. They destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels in a single engagement. They dropped 5,000-pound bunker-buster bombs on hardened anti-ship cruise missile sites along the strait. They targeted naval mine storage facilities, missile storage bunkers, and coastal surveillance stations with a precision that left the surrounding civilian port facilities intact. Then came Operation Project Freedom on May 4th. The military escort operation that briefly cracked the blockade open guided 2 American-flagged cargo vessels through the strait under Navy destroyer escort, sank 7 Iranian patrol boats that tried to intervene, and was then paused on May 6th when Trump announced great progress toward a possible diplomatic deal. The ceasefire window, a diplomatic MOU circulated in June via Pakistani mediators, briefly pulled Brent crude back down toward $85 in late June and sent hopes of a permanent reopening surging through global energy markets. Then, Iran closed it again. Ships hit mines. The IRGC declared the strait sealed. And as of this morning, July 18, 2026, U.S. forces have been striking Iran for 7 straight days. CENTCOM has completed what it calls the 6th straight day of operations to further degrade Iran's ability to threaten innocent mariners. And Iran has responded by launching missiles at American military facilities in Kuwait, Bahrain, Jordan, and Syria, widening the fire to 5 countries simultaneously. This is the most consequential military confrontation in the Middle East since the Gulf War. It is not over. The IRGC's declaration that the strait is completely closed is being disputed by CENTCOM, which says Iranian claims about tanker damage from mines are false and that U.S. forces are actively protecting transit corridors. But the psychological impact of the mine threat alone is devastating. Insurance companies have pulled out, shipping companies have halted transits. The global oil market is in managed chaos, with OECD inventories at their lowest level since 2003, and global oil demand falling by 1.1 million barrels per day for the year compared to 2025. This is what happens when the world's most important waterway becomes a battlefield. And this is the story of how the United States military, with JDAMs and Hellfire missiles and Avenger-class minesweepers and Arleigh Burke-guided missile destroyers, has been fighting day after day to take it back. Every target, every strike, every escalation, every calculation. We are breaking all of it down, right now. To understand why the U.S. military response has been so relentless and so comprehensive, you have to understand the magnitude of what Iran actually did when it closed the Strait of Hormuz. Because this was not a bluff. This was not posturing. This was the systematic, deliberate weaponization of 21 miles of international water, and the consequences were felt within hours in every economy on Earth. The Strait of Hormuz is 21 miles wide at its narrowest point, flanked by Iran to the north and Oman and the UAE to the south. Through that narrow throat passes approximately 20 million barrels of oil per day, 1/5 of all global oil consumption. It carries roughly 1/3 of the world's traded liquefied natural gas. Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain all depend on the strait as the only viable route to export their primary source of national revenue. There is no pipeline bypass with anything close to sufficient capacity. There is no alternative shipping route. When the strait closes, the world does not reroute. It contracts, sharply, painfully, and immediately. On February 28, 2026, within hours, of the U.S.-Israeli strikes that killed Khamenei and launched Operation Epic Fury, the IRGC Navy began its plan. Iranian patrol boats and mine-laying vessels moved into the shipping lanes. IRGC shore-based missile batteries went to combat readiness along the Iranian coast from Bandar Abbas to Jask. Anti-ship cruise missiles were rolled into launch positions on Greater Tumb Island. The Iranian-controlled rock sitting directly astride the tanker transit corridor. And on Abu Musa in the Tums, Iranian submarines moved into positions in the Gulf of Oman. The IRGC declared that any vessel belonging to the U.S., Israel, or any allied nation transiting the strait would be a legitimate target. Within 72 hours of the war starting, commercial shipping had effectively halted. The mine campaign was Iran's most psychologically powerful weapon. Intelligence estimates placed the number of mines deployed in the strait at between 10 and 100, a range that itself reflects the difficulty of counting devices sitting on the seabed. Iran operates a significant naval mine inventory, including contact mines, influence mines triggered by a ship's acoustic or magnetic signature, and bottom mines designed to activate as large vessels pass overhead. Former U.S. naval officers who briefed Congress in April explained that even a small number of mines in a 21-mile-wide channel can effectively shut commercial transit, because insurers, not admirals, make the decision about whether ships can sail. And insurance companies do not send $300 million tankers through channels where mines may be present, regardless of what CENTCOM says about the probability of being hit. The global economic impact was immediate and staggering. Brent crude, which opened 2026 around $70 per barrel, surged to $83.58 by March 3rd, a 7.5% single-session spike on the day Iran effectively sealed the strait. By March 13th, it crossed $102. By mid-March, it reached $100.76, and the EIA's financial content partners were invoking comparisons to the 1973 oil embargo. The April 2026 Brent average, the peak of the crisis before the June MOU, briefly offered hope, hit $107 per barrel according to the EIA's July short-term energy outlook, the highest sustained level in years. Middle Eastern oil producers cut output by more than 11 million barrels per day. Global inventory draws averaged 6.3 million barrels per day in the second quarter. OECD oil inventories fell to their lowest level since 2003. Qatar's energy minister warned in early March that Gulf exporters would halt production within days if tankers could not pass. He was not exaggerating. Kuwait and Iraq, countries that depend on straight transit for nearly 100% of their oil export revenue, were staring at fiscal catastrophe. Saudi Arabia's downstream refineries and export terminals were backing up. The UAE's oil marketing operations froze. The economic blast radius of the closure extended from the Gulf Coast to European fuel stations to Asian factory floors within weeks. Iran knew exactly what it was doing. The closure of the strait was not a military tactic designed to defeat the U.S. Navy in a conventional engagement. No Iranian commander believed that was possible. It was an economic weapon, a hostage-taking of the global energy supply designed to impose costs so enormous on the United States, its Gulf allies, its European partners, and the entire global trading system that the political will to continue the war would collapse before Iran's military capacity did. It was, in strategic terms, a brilliant gamble. What Iran did not fully anticipate was the response. Let us be precise about the scale and method of the American military response to the strait closure, because the precision here matters as much as the power. This was not carpet bombing. This was not a punitive raid. This was a sustained, carefully layered campaign of precision firepower designed to do something very specific. Destroy every Iranian military capability that enables the strait closure while leaving the oil infrastructure that makes the strait worth opening intact. That distinction between the military and the infrastructure has been the organizing principle of every CENTCOM strike package from the first week of March through this morning. On March 11th, U.S. forces destroyed 16 Iranian mine-laying vessels near the strait in a single operation. President Trump had issued the warning directly on Truth Social, demanding Iran remove the vessels immediately and warning that military consequences would be at a level never seen before. CENTCOM followed through within hours. The 16 vessels were struck while in the act of deploying or preparing to deploy mines, a targeting decision that prevented an unknown but significant additional number of mines from entering the shipping lanes. Fox News footage released the same day showed the strikes hitting the vessels in rapid succession, with CENTCOM confirming the operation publicly on X. 3 days later, on March 14th, came the Karg Island operation. Cargo. Island is Iran's primary oil export terminal, the loading point for roughly 90% of Iran's crude oil exports. It is also one of the most heavily militarized points in the entire Gulf, bristling with radar installations, missile batteries, naval mine storage facilities, and command infrastructure. Trump had threatened to strike Karg's oil infrastructure if Iran did not stop attacking vessels. In the event, CENTCOM struck more than 90 Iranian military targets on Karg in a single night, while, critically, preserving the oil infrastructure itself. Naval mine storage facilities were destroyed, missile storage bunkers were demolished, command nodes were hit, but the oil loading terminals, the pipelines, the storage tanks were left standing. The message was deliberate and precise. We will take everything military. We will leave the commercial infrastructure, stop the attacks, and the strait reopens for everyone. Iran did not stop. The IRGC continued harassing shipping. Merchant vessels were struck by drones and mines. The insurance market went into effective lockdown. And CENTCOM continued striking, expanding its target set to include coastal defense systems along the entire southern Iranian coastline, from Bandar Abbas in the east through Jask, Chabahar, and Konarak to Bushehr in the west. In a 5-hour mission on July 13th, as the current wave of escalation resumed, U.S. forces struck military targets in Bushehr, Chabahar, Jask, Konarak, Abu Musa Island, and Bandar Abbas simultaneously. U.S. forces employed precision munitions against Iranian coastal defense systems, missile and drone sites, and maritime capabilities, CENTCOM wrote on X after the mission concluded at 10:15 p.m. Eastern Time. The July 15th strike marked the 5th consecutive day of operations in the resumed conflict and introduced a new target category, Greater Tunbih Island. Researchers have called Greater Tunbih part of Iran's arch defense, the layered system of island positions that allows the IRGC to cover the primary shipping channels through the strait with overlapping missile and drone fires. A 90-minute precision strike on the island's coastal defense and cruise missile storage and launch sites represented a direct attack on the architectural spine of Iran's anti-ship capability. CENTCOM simultaneously struck command centers, air defense sites, and coastal surveillance facilities in Bandar Abbas, completing the second wave of the day at 9 p.m. Eastern. Then came the tanker shot that defined the week. U.S. forces fired Hellfire missiles into the funnel of the Curacao-flagged oil tanker MT Belma. A vessel CENTCOM said was transiting international waters toward Karg Island in apparent violation of the U.S. blockade. The shot was precise, deliberate, and calculated. Targeting the funnel rather than the hull disabled the vessel without sinking it or killing the crew. It was a message to every ship owner in the world considering running the blockade. We will stop you, and we will do it with the same precision we are using on Iranian military targets. Iran, meanwhile, activated its entire retaliatory architecture. The IRGC fired 2 waves of ballistic missiles at the U.S. air base at Prince Hassan in Jordan, claiming to have destroyed a command and control center and MQ-9 drone hangars. Iranian drones struck communication systems and radar sites in Bahrain. The Iranian army conducted drone attacks on U.S. facilities in Kuwait, targeting fuel tanks, a Patriot air defense system, a watchtower, and an ammunition depot. Jordan intercepted 8 Iranian missiles over its airspace. Qatar and Kuwait activated air defense alarms simultaneously. Syria's Al-Tanf base was struck. At least 35 people were killed, and more than 300 wounded by U.S. strikes inside Iran as of the Iranian Health Ministry's latest count. The exchange rate of destruction is not symmetrical. Iran is losing its coastal military architecture target by target. The U.S. is absorbing retaliatory strikes on bases across 5 countries, but has not lost a major vessel or a significant number of personnel in any single engagement. Every night, CENTCOM strikes, another piece of Iran's ability to threaten the strait, is degraded. Every morning the IRGC strikes back, another regional country's civilian population spends another night in bomb shelters. This is the war over the world's most important waterway. And it is not close to finished. Of all the weapons Iran has deployed in this conflict, the ballistic missiles, the anti-ship cruise missiles, the armed drones, the fast attack boats, the shore-based gun emplacements, none has been as strategically consequential as the naval mine. And of all the military challenges the United States faces in reopening the Strait of Hormuz, none is as technically difficult, as time-consuming, or as psychologically powerful as the mine threat. Understanding why requires understanding what naval mines actually do. And what they do goes far beyond sinking ships. A naval mine is an autonomous weapon. Once deployed, it requires no further Iranian action to impose its effects. It sits on the seabed or drifts at anchor depth waiting. A modern influence mine is triggered by the acoustic signature of a large ship, the sound of its propellers and engines, or by its magnetic field, or by changes in water pressure as it passes overhead. The mine does not distinguish between a warship and a tanker. It does not respond to ceasefire negotiations. It does not go away when diplomats reach an agreement. It waits patiently in international waters that belong to no one and that every country's ships need to use. The Pentagon acknowledged in classified briefings to the House Armed Services Committee in April 2026 that clearing the mines Iran has deployed in the Strait would likely take 6 months. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declined to confirm that specific timeline publicly when asked at a press conference, but he notably did not deny it. We feel confident in our ability in the correct period of time to clear any mines that we identify, Hegseth said, language carefully chosen to avoid, committing to a deadline while declining to contradict the 6-month estimate. 6 months of mine clearing. In the world's most heavily trafficked, most strategically critical, most militarily contested waterway. By a fleet of Avenger-class minesweepers that were dispatched from Japan to the Middle East specifically for this mission. Slow, specialized vessels that cannot conduct their work under active fire, and that require the very military protection they are trying to make possible for commercial shipping. The number of mines deployed, according to intelligence estimates, was between 10 and 100, a range that reflects the classification wall around specific operational intelligence. Former Royal Navy Commander Tom Sharp was asked how quickly Iran could remine the Strait after U.S. forces cleared it. His answer was immediate and devastating. Just a few days if you weren't getting shot at. The mine threat is not a one-time problem. It is a renewable weapon. Every time U.S. minesweepers clear a lane and the military situation creates a window for remining, Iran can close that window within days with mine-laying vessels that can be deployed from any of the coastal facilities and island positions the IRGC maintains along the strait. That is why the U.S. strike campaign has specifically targeted Iranian mine storage facilities, mine-laying vessels, and the coastal infrastructure that supports them. The March 14th Karg Island strike, which destroyed naval mine storage facilities among its 90-plus targets, was explicitly aimed at degrading Iran's mine inventory and its ability to resupply mine-laying operations. The destruction of 16 mine-laying vessels on March 11th was designed to deny Iran the platforms it needs to deploy its remaining inventory. Every coastal radar station, every command center, every surveillance facility that CENTCOM has struck along the Iranian coast is, among other things, part of the system that coordinates mine-laying operations. But the mine's most powerful effect is psychological, and that effect cannot be bombed away. Former intelligence officer Lynette Nusbacher, speaking to the national newspaper, captured the core of the problem. That plays in the Iranians' favor because whether there are mines there or not, people think there's mines there, and they will operate accordingly. Insurance actuaries do not underwrite risk based on CENTCOM's operational assessments. They underwrite it based on what they can verify. And in a 21-mile channel where between 10 and 100 mines may or may not have been cleared, where Iran can remine in days, where no independent verification of clearance is possible during active hostilities, they will not send their clients on ships. Period. Operation Project Freedom on May 4th proved that the U.S. can physically escort ships through a partially cleared lane. 2 American-flagged cargo vessels successfully transited the strait under Navy destroyer escort. 7 Iranian patrol boats that tried to intervene were sunk. The American ships made it through, but former Royal Navy experts who were asked whether this could be scaled to the volume of commercial traffic the global economy needs called the operation unsustainable, arguing that the U.S. does not have sufficient assets to escort the hundreds of ships per week that normally transit the strait, and that the air defense missiles required to protect those escorts during a 12 to 24-hour transit could exhaust U.S. naval interceptor inventories faster than they could be replenished. The June MOU between Washington and Tehran, circulated via Pakistani mediators and confirmed by the Hormuz Strait, monitors crisis timeline, included as one of its core provisions that Iran would clear the mines it had laid as part of any permanent reopening agreement. Iran clears its own mines. That is the only way to clear them quickly and completely, because the Iranians know where they laid them. U.S. minesweepers, working blind, face the 6-month timeline. Iranian mine teams, working from their own. Deployment maps could clear the strait in days. That provision, Iran clears the mines, the U.S. lifts the blockade, Iran gets sanctions waivers, was the central bargain of the June agreement, and it was the bargain that collapsed when Iran closed the strait again in July and the current wave of strikes resumed. The mines are still there. The strait is still contested. And every shipping executive, every insurer, every tanker captain, and every oil trader in the world is watching CENTCOM's daily strike announcements and doing one calculation. Is it safe yet? The answer, today, July 18th, 2026, is still no. Pull back from the targeting coordinates and the strike packages and the mine counts and look at the strategic picture from altitude. What is this war actually about? What are both sides actually fighting for? And what does the world look like when it ends? Whenever and however that happens. Start with the energy picture, because it has already been rewritten permanently. Brent crude peaked near $107 per barrel in April 2026, the highest sustained level in years, before the June MOU briefly brought prices back toward $85 in late June, the EIA's July 2026 short term. Energy Outlook, published days ago, forecast Brent averaging $74 in the third quarter if the strait reopens normally, and falling toward $65 in 2027 as global production recovers. But the same EIA report warned that every day the current escalation continues, that recovery timeline slides further out. Daily prices have already risen sharply from the June lows since the strait was reclosed. In early July, the Brent price on July 13th, when U.S. strikes resumed and Brent posted its biggest single-day percentage gain in more than 6 years, closed at $83.30 per barrel, a 9.59% spike in a single session. The human cost behind those price numbers is staggering. OECD oil inventories are at their lowest level since 2003. Global oil demand is running 1.1 million barrels per day below last year. That demand destruction is not an abstraction. It represents factories running at reduced capacity, farmers cutting back on machinery fuel, airlines trimming flight schedules, and developing world governments rationing fuel subsidies they can no longer afford. Egyptian farmers, who already lost their wheat cycle to fertilizer price spikes from earlier in the conflict, are now watching fuel costs eat into whatever remains of their agricultural margin. Indonesian fishing villages are anchoring their boats because the fuel cost per trip exceeds the value of the catch. This is the cascading, grinding humanitarian cost of a closed Strait of Hormuz, and it falls heaviest on the people furthest from the decisions being made in Washington and Tehran. For the United States, the Strait campaign represents a strategic test case of a kind the U.S. military has not faced since at least the first Gulf War. Can American air power, combined with naval, blockade and precision strike, physically force open a contested maritime choke point against an adversary that controls the adjacent coastline? Operational Project Freedom proved the concept, briefly, partially, and at high cost. The question now is whether it can be made sustainable. Sources told CNN this week that Trump is actively weighing options to expand the U.S. military operation beyond the current strike package. The Aramco refinery attack? Iran struck Saudi Arabia's largest refinery as part of its wider regional strike campaign, causing oil price spikes and raising the question of how much escalation the Gulf states can absorb before they demand a different American approach. Has added pressure from Riyadh for a more definitive resolution. Iran's strategic calculus, meanwhile, has evolved. The IRGC's declaration that the strait is an unbreakable red line is not simply rhetoric. It reflects a genuine strategic bet that the mine threat, combined with sustained pressure on U.S. Gulf bases, will eventually impose political costs on Washington that exceed the military cost Iran is absorbing from CENTCOM strikes. Iran's foreign ministry spokesperson said explicitly on July 15th that Iran has no plans for negotiations with the U.S., a hard line that contradicts both the June MOU and the current diplomatic backchannels that Pakistan and Oman have been trying to maintain. Iran has widened its retaliatory strikes to Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Syria, and the UAE, a deliberate strategy of regionalizing the cost of the conflict, hoping that enough American allies screaming about Iranian missiles landing in their countries will eventually produce pressure on Washington to negotiate on terms more favorable to Tehran. The five-country retaliation is itself a measure of desperation as much as capability. Iran is burning through missile and drone inventories it cannot easily replace. Its economy, under the dual pressure of U.S. sanctions and the naval blockade that CENTCOM says is costing Tehran $500 million per day, is deteriorating rapidly. The Ayatollah Khamenei, who was killed in February, was the symbolic and theological foundation of the Islamic Republic's resistance doctrine. His son has inherited a system under more external military pressure than it has faced in its entire existence. What does the endgame look like? The June MOU offered a template, a 60-day ceasefire. Iran clears the mines. The strait reopens with no tolls. The U.S. lifts the blockade. Iran receives sanctions waivers. And the nuclear provisions, the sharpest sticking point, are left for subsequent negotiation. That template is still on the table. Pakistani and Omani mediators have not given up. The American diplomatic channel has not gone dark. Even as CENTCOM strikes for the 7th consecutive day, the White House has not formally declared that a negotiated solution is off the table. But the window is narrowing. Every day of renewed strikes makes the political conditions for a ceasefire harder to reconstruct. Every Iranian missile that lands near a U.S. facility, Jordan, or a Bahraini fuel depot raises the domestic American pressure for a more definitive military resolution. Every tanker that sits idle in the Gulf of Oman, waiting for the mine threat to clear, represents another day of economic damage that the global economy is absorbing at a rate it can sustain for months, not years. The Strait of Hormuz has been contested, threatened, and occasionally disrupted before, notably during the 1980s tanker war, when both Iran and Iraq struck shipping in the Gulf throughout the Iran-Iraq conflict. But it has never been fully, deliberately, systematically sealed the way the IRGC has sealed it in 2026. This is not a blockade in the historical sense. It is a weapon of mass economic disruption, using geography as ammunition. The U.S. military, with its JDAMs and its Hellfires, and its Avenger minesweepers, and its guided missile destroyers, and its carrier strike groups, and its B-52s delivering 5,000-pound bunker busters, has answered that weapon with the most powerful conventional military force in human history. The exchange has gone on for more than 4 months. It shows no sign of ending today. Today is July 18th, 2026. The Strait of Hormuz is still contested. U.S. forces are still striking. Iranian missiles are still flying. And 20% of the world's daily oil supply is still waiting to flow again through 21 miles of the most dangerous water on Earth. The question is not whether the U.S. military is powerful enough to force this open. It is. The question is whether force alone can produce the political conditions for it to stay open. And that question, which has always been the harder one, is still waiting for an answer.